Jason Chaffetz, Utah's 3rd District Congressional Representative, thank you so much for being part of Three Questions
Thanks for having me.
today.
Appreciate it.
You're going to be talking with fired FBI Director James Comey today. What do you anticipate talking to him about, and what's going to happen in that conversation?
It could get any moment. It could interrupt this conversation right here, but want to know where the documents are. Do they even exist? The New York Times has never seen them, and they wrote the story. So I want to know, are they at the Department of Justice? Does Director Comey have them? And if not, are there documents at all? Number two, if he's going to appear in the Senate, we'd like to have him appear in the House of Representatives, but I want to hear him out. I want to have the conversation. We've always been cordial in the past. He's worked with me in the past. I want to try to find some accommodation.
Do you anticipate having to use a subpoena to get whatever materials
I hope
there are?
not. I don't think so. He is a person who has been cooperative in the past. I don't think so. It'll be interesting to see what the Department of Justice does. Do I have to show that I will use a compulsory method in order to get those? That's the reason I put it out on Twitter, to just let them know, hey, we're serious about this. We really do need to see the documents. But I think Director Comey will actually show up. I really do. At some point. May not be this Wednesday, but at some point.
From what you have been able to gather from the news media and conversations you've had, do you think President Trump obstructed justice?
Look, I don't see any evidence that he has actually obstructed justice. There is a New York Times article that claims that somebody wrote down, Mr. Comey, the former FBI director, wrote down that he said a particular phrase, but nobody's even seen the document yet. Not even the New York Times has seen the actual document. So first step is, let's see the document. Number two, let's talk to Director Comey. And then let's also understand that after that moment, in public testimony, under oath, Director Comey said there was no undue influence. You also have the acting FBI director in just the last few days who said, we've never seen an instance where there's been undue influence to try to sway one direction or the other. So at this point, I don't see any evidence of that. Now, we're asking the hard questions. We want to see the document. We want to talk to Director Comey, see how he took the comments, if they did happen, and we'll let the evidence take us where it's at. But at this point, I don't see it.
Why do you think James Comey was fired from his directorship at the FBI?
You know, if I had to guess, and I have not spoken to the president about this, but I think he was probably looking at it saying, look, Republicans are frustrated with him, the administration's frustrated with him, and certainly the Democrats are frustrated with him because he did things that are well outside the previous norms, I mean, for decades, of what an FBI director would do. So I think he was looking at that and made the best decision he could. Questions about timing and how he did it, I think they're legitimate questions, but I don't see any crystal clear evidence that there was some, obstruction of justice or something that would rise to the level of a crime.
When you hear that the president told the Russians that Mr. Comey was a nut job and that firing him relieves some pressure, what goes through your mind?
I don't know if those words are exactly right. That we weren't sitting in that meeting. When you hear the National Security Advisor, Mr. McMaster, and others, I tend to believe them. I tend to believe the Americans, not the Russians in this case. But, I'm sure a lot of people are curious, but that doesn't necessarily rise to the level where there's something dramatic has happened. I think Donald Trump is kind of, it's kind of who he is. It's who America elected, and they knew that was sort of his approach, and it sounds like he might have done that. But again, we weren't in the room. We don't really know.
What do you think of President Trump's job performance so far in the first 5 months?
Look, there are things that I really like that he's done. Certainly appointing a Supreme Court justice of the caliber that he did and getting him through in the first 100 days was a huge achievement. There are a lot of Utahns who voted specifically for Donald Trump, if nothing else, but for the fact that he wanted a conservative Supreme Court. And to that, he did that. There have been a lot of missteps, but I think that's true for any new administration. He said and done some things I just kind of, I don't necessarily agree with that. When he said there's this mass voter fraud by millions of people, I just don't see it, so we didn't do an investigation of that. And I think he's learning as he's going. I mean, America hired a non-career political professional, and that's what they got.
He's been in the Middle East this past weekend. How do you think he performed there?
Look, I think he did exceptionally well. in the Arab world. They're being in Saudi Arabia. I was in Saudi Arabia a number of months before that, and I think he communicated that America has their backs when it comes to Iran. There are a lot of people that have been enemies in the past that can be united in the fact that they're afraid of and worried about Iran. And when we, the United States of America, have to lead that charge. The president has been in Israel. It's one of our closest allies, great economic trading partner, but also one that's been under attack from everybody. One of the smallest countries in the world, but one of the closest to the United States of America. So I think the president was spot on what he did in Israel as well. And he still has the bulk of his trip ahead of him. So I think he's done exceptionally well, and it was a good message to send.
How do you think President Trump has handled the North Korean situation so far?
I did go to South Korea and I went to Japan, and you have to bring together South Korea, Japan. You also, I think he's done an exceptional job with China in getting China to lean on and use their military might and their proximity and their economic ties to North Korea. Kim Jong-un is still one of the biggest threats to world peace and safety, as well as the United States of America. I believe in peace through strength. You need to have the military armament, and you need to have the capability to take out a threat that could happen at any time. I was pleasantly surprised that the Secretary of State had personally met with the foreign minister of South Korea 5 times already. You never read about that, you never see it on television, but I think they're doing all the right things to put economic, political, and military pressure on North Korea. It's the right thing to do.
Are you optimistic that we can get through this episode without military hostilities?
No, nobody wants to have to use the United States military, but if you do, guess what? You go with everything and you win decisively. And you do that in conjunction with with the South Koreans. We have to be hand in glove with them. You've got to make sure that the Chinese know exactly what we're doing and why we're doing it. But you have to have a military that's prepared to do what it needs to do to take out the threat. Because if they can hit South Korea, if they can hit Japan, if they can hit the United States, we can't take that risk. You just can't do it. And you've got a crazy man in Kim Jong-un, and he may need to be dealt with in the harshest of ways.
You were just reelected to Congress in November. Yeah. After having gone through all of that and going through all of what you put yourself and your family through, your supporters, your constituents, all of those folks who have had your interest and their interests in mind back in Congress, why leave after just 6 months?
Well, my life has changed over the last 18 months. You know, when you start this process, it's a long one. But my personal life has changed, and I always promised people I would get in, serve, and then I'd get out. I was never going to be a lifer. We joke a lot about sleeping on a cot in my office, but that's very real, and it didn't change. And so there just came a point where I kind of had to look myself in the mirror and say, you know, when are we going to get off this crazy merry-go-round that we're on? And it was the right time for our family, and I prioritized my family.
Why not last year instead of now?
Well, life changed over the last 18 months. 2 of our 3 kids got married, both of which married wonderful, wonderful people. As a parent, you count your blessings when they marry great spouses. But they're also moving out of state. We're faced with the reality of becoming empty nesters. I mean, there are a variety of factors, but I'm looking at the calendar, looking at the next 200 or 300 nights away from my family. I don't want to be away from my wife. I'm still probably going to travel, but not at the velocity and not at the extent that I've been doing it in the past, where literally week in and week out, you get maybe 1 or 2 days a month at home, and sometimes 3 if you're lucky. I just don't want to. I just couldn't keep doing that.
The cost to the taxpayers of Utah to replace you midterm is significant. They've got to hold another election. They've got all kinds of things that have to happen. Did that weigh on you at all in making your decision?
I was very concerned about that, worked closely with the governor's office. And if you kind of piggyback on the municipal elections, then the cost becomes minimal, and certainly much less than some of the other forms. And, like, I know the legislature has their prerogatives and their imperatives, and the governor has his. I did want to minimize the costs. I don't want it to go on for a long period of time. I'm not the first person to step down from Congress, but yeah, they have to go through that process.
When you first announced that you were going to not seek re-election, that was one thing. But then after that, when you announced that you were not probably going to finish your term, your critics started using the word quitter and not doing the job we sent him or returned him to Washington to do. Is that a fair criticism?
Look, I got people who are going to say whatever, but you get a pretty tough skin in this business real quick. No matter what you do, you could walk out and say that the sun is going to rise this morning, and you'd have a good portion of people saying, oh, that's the Russians' fault, and so you just kind of smile at it and say, look, I've always said that I was going to prioritize my family. I always said I was going to get in serving, I would get out. When I remember talking to Jim Hansen, who served from the state for 22 years, and he said, you'll get to that point where you'll know. And I just felt like, hey, I knew. And there are other people that can serve in this capacity. There are other people that can do this. I still have another month ahead of me, and I plan to use all the vigor I have all the way through June 30th.
As you look over the last 9 years in Congress, what do you count as your accomplishments? What are you most proud of?
Look, we did a number of things here in the state that I think were very important. Land transfers, the Y Mountain, hydroelectric project that will be done down in Utah County, and certainly fighting for Bears Ears and getting that rescinded. That job's not quite done yet, but we're making the case and visiting with the President and the Interior Secretary and the people that we need to do to help get that done. I think what touches my heart probably as much as anything is there were 8 members of the United States military who, when I was in the Congress, they paid the ultimate sacrifice. And I complain a lot about sleeping on the cot and being away, but you compare that to our men and women who go out and serve, they'll be gone for a year at a time. And these 8 men, in this case, all lost their lives. And I carried in my wallet their names and visiting with each of those families, going to each of those funerals. Probably the most rewarding moment, but also the most difficult moment, but also what I was supposed to be doing. And that, as much as anything, I'll remember forever.
Being in Congress is one thing, but being chairman of the House Oversight Committee is something, I mean, that's a very powerful position. How difficult is it to give up that chairmanship? Believe me, it's better to be chairman than not be chairman. You get to set the agenda, you get to use the gavel, you get to move forward on a lot of things. But when you compare that to your wife and your kids and your family and the time away, I really like the work. Don't get me wrong. I love the rambunctious nature, the tug and the pull and how important it is. But I love my family, and there's a difference. And at some point, you got to prioritize it, not drink the Kool-Aid and get that Potomac fever, they call it, and get stuck there. And I think a lot of people do that, and I think it's a mistake. And I've been opposed to term limits, but I do believe that you get in, serve, and get out, and you don't get so full of yourself, and you don't get so full of Washington, D.C. that it becomes intoxicating. And I think I got those priorities right. Last week in your news conference, you mentioned that there are certain things about the Oversight Committee that you'd like to see changed.
Yes.
What are some of those ideas?
Look, as a body, the legislative body has got to be able to enforce a subpoena. Right now, if we want to extract a document or compel somebody's attendance, we have to go back to the administration. You shouldn't have to go to the administration. They're the ones that you're providing the oversight. So there's an internal conflict of interest there. You should have an expedited way to get right to the courts. And that's one of the key things that I would, if I could change one thing to make sure that there's better oversight of the executive branch, allow us to bypass the executive branch in order to be able to compel documents and testimony, or at least attendance. If they want to plead the fifth, they can, but we've got to be able to get to the courts. Right now, the Obama administration sat on things, and the Trump administration hasn't been that much better either. They have not loosened up and provided documents that we are due as the legislative body to get.
To give you true subpoena power, would that not mean that you cross over into the judicial branch of the government and the separation of powers issues?
Well, I think it's right that if the legislative branch could go directly to the judicial branch, and if 2 of the 3 are agreeing that you have to provide the documents, then guess what? I don't care, Department of Justice. I don't care if you're the Secretary of State. You're going to have to provide those documents. And Freedom of Information Act, that's how it works. Freedom of Information Act by the media or an individual, they will make the case. They'll go right to the courts. And guess what? the executive branch is scared of those people, and they'll provide those documents right away. So we got to stand up for ourselves.
Politico says you're going to Fox. Are you going to Fox?
I feel no compulsion to talk about post congressional employment, but at some point we'll come back here and talk about that.
When can you tell us what you are going to
June
do?
30th is pretty much a line in the sand that I said I was going to be done, and either maybe a day or two before that or soon thereafter I'll talk about. I think it'll be a variety of things. It's not going to be one big thing. It's not like I'm moving to New York or doing anything like that. My home's in Alpine, Utah, and that's where I'll be.
When you and Julie decided it was time for you to come home from Congress, come home, time to stop playing and come home from Congress. The president had not fired James Comey yet.
Right.
The Russian investigation was percolating, but it hadn't come to a boil yet. Now all of those things have happened. Are you second-guessing your timing on stepping down?
No. Look, there are always a host of investigations going on. There's always somebody doing something stupid somewhere. So there is always a full plate for those of us that involve and engage in investigations. It's a crazy train of a merry-go-round, and at some point you got to step off and say, all right, and then pass that baton. I mean, that's been done for a couple hundred years, and I'll pass the baton to whoever the next chairman is, and wish them the best.
But investigating the president and his administration and their possible ties to Russia,
hey, look,
that's not an investigation that comes along every day.
Look,
Why not wait until it's over?
I've been doing that kind of stuff for 8-9 years. I mean, we investigated President Obama, the Attorney General, on Fast and Furious. We were investigating the Secretary of State and Hillary Clinton for misuse of classified information. I mean, we've been at the highest levels, and the reason you know about the problems in Benghazi and the IRS and Lois Lerner and Hillary Clinton emails and Fast and Furious and the Secret Service, it's all because of the work we've done. And we've had a really good staff, and I got other good people in Congress that I work with in order to extract this, but that's always going on, and I never buy this idea that, oh, well, you got to finish this thing and it can't get done without you. Yeah, it can get done without me.
June 30th is coming, and between now and then, as chairman of the House Oversight Committee, are you not a lame duck and less impactful than you would have been had you not announced a specific date?
Well, look, I provided about a 6 weeks notice because in the Congress, they're going to elect another member to be the chairman, and they go through a steering committee process. They have to make their case. I want there to be a smooth transition. That's what I'm trying to do. I also wanted to hit some dates that were important to the governor's office and elections. I wanted potential candidates to have time to garner resources and develop policy positions and do what they need to do in order to run for office. So I'm trying to be as gracious and open and not just be selfish and hold it till the last moment and say, hey, by the way, that's going to happen tomorrow. I'm just trying to foreshadow things, and it's my intention to step down on June 30th, and I expect to meet that date.
Do you have any regrets as you leave Congress?
You know, I talk a lot about my family, but it has been such a great blessing for my family, too. I don't think there are any regrets. There's certain things you probably would do a little bit different, but I think that's different than a real regret. I'm just so honored, thrilled, and privileged to have served. And in 9 years, plus I served a year as the chief of staff to the governor of Utah. And for the last 13 years, I've either been a campaign manager, a chief of staff, a candidate, or a member of Congress. And so I've had more than a full share, and just very grateful that Utah was so generous in allowing me to serve. But I look back and I don't see any regrets in the rearview mirror.
Regardless of what you wind up doing immediately after June 30th, do you still see yourself running for governor in 2020?
You know, I'm trying not to take anything off the table, but I'm also not trying to foreshadow that I'm going to do something. I mean, I've kind of joked with you that a definite maybe. That's not what I'm trying to do here. Let me get some more balance in my life and recalibrate here, and then wake up in a couple years and see what the landscape looks like. But look, I'm not trying to do more politics right now. I'm trying to do less. So we'll see what that looks like down the road.
Saturday, you went to the state Republican convention, and you delivered a speech there, and were well received. As you look at the change in leadership there and the vote on medical marijuana and those kinds of things, and the attitude toward count my vote that is inherent with this leadership change, Give me a profile of how you view the Utah Republican Party and how it will operate going forward.
Well, I think we're in strong footing. The Republicans occupy all 6 seats, the 2 senators and the 4 House, dominate in the state legislature, dominate at the governor's office. And at the end of the day, it's about policies. So the Republicans, as long as they stay true to the principles found in the Constitution, fiscal discipline, limited government, accountability, the national level or the federal level, a strong national defense, we're going to be moving in the right direction. But we should never take that for granted. There are new people that are going to step up, new people that have to get involved. Democrats are in a tough place, but I don't think they have policies. They can yell, scream, and holler and, wave signs, but they don't have the policies that can garner enough votes to actually change seats in any of these bodies. And so the Republican Party's in good hands, but never take it for granted, never assume that it's always going to be there. You better darn well be paying attention to Utahns and what they care about.
Jason Chaffetz, 3rd District Congressman from Utah, thank you so much
Thanks, Bob.
for being part of 3 Questions.
Thank you.